The police cruiser's red and blue lights painted the suburban street in chaos as Karen Whitmore stood on her manicured lawn, arms crossed, watching two officers approach her neighbor's front door. She'd done it, finally called them on the Martinez family next door. But as Detective Sarah Chen stepped out of the unmarked sedan behind the patrol car, Karen's satisfied smirk began to falter. The detective wasn't here about trespassing complaints or property disputes. She was here because 3 hours ago, Karen's own children had been found at the bottom of someone else's pool land. The 911 call that saved their lives had come from the very woman Karen was trying to destroy. The morning sun cast long shadows across Maple Grove's pristine sidewalks as Karen Whitmore stepped onto her front porch, coffee mug in hand, surveying her domain. At 42, she'd perfected the art of suburban surveillance, noting every delivery truck, every unfamiliar car, every blade of grass that dared grow too tall in her neighbors' yards. This morning, however, her laser focus was trained on the house directly across the street. The Martinez family had moved in 6 months ago, and Karen had made it her personal mission to document every perceived infraction of the neighborhood's unwritten rules. Rosa Martinez, a pediatric nurse at the local hospital, worked nights and often slept during the day. Her husband Miguel ran a small landscaping business, which meant trucks and equipment in the driveway, clear violation of the Homeowners Association guidelines, in Karen's opinion. But it wasn't just the trucks that bothered Karen. It was the way the Martinez children played in their front yard without supervision, the way Rosa hung laundry on a line in the backyard, the way Miguel's music drifted from his workshop on Saturday mornings. It was the way they lived their lives, as if they belonged here, as if Maple Grove hadn't been Karen's carefully curated paradise for the past 15 years. "Mom, can we go swimming at Isabella's house today?" Karen turned to find her twins, Emma and Ethan, standing in the doorway. At 8 years old, they were carbon copies of their mother, blonde hair, blue eyes, and an inherited sense of entitlement that Karen had cultivated since birth. "Absolutely not," Karen said, not taking her eyes off the Martinez house. "You have your own pool." Karen's voice carried the authority of someone unaccustomed to being questioned. "Besides, I don't want you over there unsupervised." Emma's face scrunched in confusion. "But Mrs. Martinez is a nurse. She takes care of kids at the hospital." "That's different," Karen replied, though she couldn't quite articulate why. The truth was, Rosa Martinez made her uncomfortable in ways she couldn't name. The woman was too competent, too kind, to everything that Karen suspected she herself was not. Across the street, the Martinez front door opened, and Rosa emerged in her scrubs, keys in hand. She moved with the efficient grace of someone perpetually running late, but she still took the time to wave when she noticed Karen on her porch. Karen didn't wave back. Instead, she pulled out her phone and opened the neighborhood app. Scrolling through her previous posts about the Martinez family, noise complaints, parking violations, a lengthy dissertation about property values, Edie'd been building a case for months. Today, she decided, would be the day she escalated things. "Karen, everything okay out there?" Her husband David appeared beside her, straightening his tie. At 45, he was a successful corporate lawyer who'd learned long ago that the path of least resistance was agreeing with his wife's increasingly obsessive behavior. "Just keeping an eye on things," Karen said, not looking at him. "Did you know they have people over every weekend? Last night there were at least 6 cars in their driveway." David sighed. "It was Isabella's birthday party. The kids were invited, remember? You declined." "I wasn't going to subject our children to that chaos." Karen's grip tightened on her coffee mug. "Besides, I heard they don't even own that house. They're probably renters." "Karen, they have a mortgage just like everyone else. I saw Miguel at the hardware store last week. He's putting in a new fence." This piece of information should have been neutral, but to Karen, it felt like a direct attack. A new fence meant permanence. It meant the Martinez family wasn't going anywhere. "Without HOA approval, I bet," she muttered. David kissed her cheek, a gesture that had become more routine than affectionate over the years. "I've got to run. Early meeting. Try to have a good day, okay?" Karen watched him drive away, then returned her attention to the Martinez house. Rosa was backing out of her driveway, probably heading to the hospital for another shift. Miguel's truck was already gone, which meant he was out making his rounds. leaving the children with their grandmother, who'd been staying with them since Rosa started working nights. The grandmother Abuela, the children called her, was another source of irritation for Karen. The elderly woman spoke limited English and had the audacity to maintain a vegetable garden in the backyard that attracted birds and, according to Karen's detailed observations, possibly rats. Karen's phone buzzed with a text from her sister Jennifer, who lived 3 states away but somehow always knew when Karen was spiraling. "How's the neighborhood watch commander doing today?" Karen typed. Back quickly, just concerned about property values. "New neighbors don't understand the standards here. Maybe try talking to them. From what you've told me, they sound like a nice family." Karen deleted the message thread without responding. Jennifer didn't understand. She lived in some bohemian neighborhood where people painted their houses purple and kept chickens in their backyards. She couldn't comprehend the delicate ecosystem of suburban perfection that Karen had spent years maintaining. The sound of children's laughter drifted across the street. Through the Martinez's backyard gate, Karen could see Isabella and her younger brother Carlos playing in their above-ground pool. The pool was another violation installed without permits. Karen was certain. She'd already researched the city codes and was preparing to file a complaint. Emma and Ethan had migrated to the living room window, pressing their faces against the glass as they watched their neighbors splash and play. "Mom, why can't we be friends with Isabella?" Emma asked. "She's in my class, and she's really nice." "Because," Karen said, struggling to find an explanation that didn't sound petty, "they're not our kind of people." "What kind of people are they?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Karen looked at her daughter's earnest face and felt a flicker of something doubt, perhaps, or shame. But she quickly squashed it. "They're just different," she said finally. "Now go play in your own backyard." As the twins trudged away, Karen returned to her post on the porch. She opened her phone and began composing a new message to the HOA board. "Dear board members, I am writing to express my ongoing concerns about the property at 1247 Maple Grove Drive. The Martinez family continues to violate multiple community standards, including." She was interrupted by a commotion from across the street. Miguel's truck was pulling into the driveway, and Karen could see him gesturing animatedly as he spoke on his phone. His voice carried across the quiet street, and though Karen couldn't make out the words, she could hear the stress in his tone. Within minutes, Rosa's car came speeding down the street, taking the turn into their driveway too fast. She jumped out, still in her scrubs, and ran toward the backyard. Karen could hear raised voices, Miguel and Rosa talking rapidly in Spanish, their words urgent and overlapping. Then came the sound Karen had been unconsciously waiting for, the wail of sirens in the distance. Growing closer, an ambulance turned onto Maple Grove Drive, followed by a fire truck. Karen felt a surge of vindication. Finally, the authorities were taking notice of the Martinez family's reckless behavior. Whatever safety violation they'd committed, it was serious enough to warrant an emergency response. But as the vehicles parked in front of the Martinez house, Karen noticed something that made her blood run cold. The EMTs weren't heading for the Martinez backyard. They were walking toward her house. "Mrs. Whitmore," one of the paramedics called out, "are you the mother of Emma and Ethan?" Karen's phone slipped from her hands, shattering on the porch steps. Behind the paramedic, she could see Rosa Martinez climbing out of the ambulance, her scrubs soaked, her face pale but determined. "Your children," Rosa said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "They're going to be okay, but we need to get them to the hospital." Now, Karen's legs gave out, and she collapsed onto her porch steps. Through the fog of shock, she could hear Rosa explaining what had happened, but the words seemed to come from very far away. "They were in your backyard pool. I saw them from my bedroom window when I got home. ... They weren't moving. I jumped the fence." The world tilted sideways as Karen realized what Rosa was saying. Her children, her perfect, obedient children, had somehow accessed their backyard pool while she was standing guard on the front porch. And Rosa Martinez, the woman Karen had spent months trying to destroy, had saved their lives. As the ambulance pulled away with Emma and Ethan inside, Karen remained on her porch steps, surrounded by the shattered pieces of her phone and the even more shattered pieces of her carefully constructed reality. Across the street, Miguel was hosing down his driveway, washing off Detective Sarah Chen had seen enough domestic disputes, neighborhood feuds, and suburban drama to fill a small library. But something about the call she'd received an hour ago had set off every alarm bell in her experienced mind. A near-drowning incident involving children, a heroic neighbor, and what the anonymous caller had described as a pattern of harassment that needs to be investigated. She parked her unmarked sedan behind the fire truck and stepped out, her dark eyes immediately cataloging the scene. The Martinez house showed signs of recent chaos-wet footprints on the driveway, a garden hose still running, and Miguel Martinez standing in his doorway with the shell-shocked expression of a man who'd just witnessed a miracle. Across the street, Karen Whitmore sat on her porch steps like a broken doll, staring at the pieces of her shattered phone. Her perfectly styled blonde hair had come loose from its ponytail, and mascara streaked down her cheeks in dark rivers. Mrs. Whitmore, Detective Chen approached slowly, her voice gentle but authoritative. "I'm Detective Chen. I need to ask you some questions about what happened here today." Karen looked up with vacant eyes. "My children, ... Are they really okay?" "They're at Children's Hospital being evaluated, but the paramedics," said Mrs. Martinez, "got to them in time. You're very lucky." Chen pulled out her notebook. "Can you tell me how Emma and Ethan accessed your backyard pool?" I don't know." Karen's voice was barely a whisper. "I was right here. I was watching. I was always watching ... Watching what, Mrs. Whitmore?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Karen's gaze drifted across the street to the Martinez house, and something shifted in her expression, a flicker of the old resentment, trying to resurface. "I was keeping an eye on the neighborhood," she said, her voice gaining strength. "There have been concerns about the new residents." Detective Chen followed Karen's gaze. "You mean the Martinez family? They don't follow the rules, the HOA, guidelines, the noise ordinances, the parking restrictions." Karen stood up, brushing off her designer jeans. "I've been documenting everything. I have photos, timestamps, a complete record of their violations. Mrs. Whitmore, your children nearly drowned while you were documenting your neighbor's parking violations." The blunt question hit Karen like a physical blow. She staggered slightly, gripping the porch railing for support. "That's not, I was being responsible. Someone has to maintain standards in this neighborhood." Detective Chen had interviewed enough people to recognize deflection when she heard it. "Mrs. Whitmore, I received a call about this incident," someone reported. "That you've been harassing the Martinez family. They seem to think today's events might be connected to that harassment." Karen's face flushed red. "Harassment? I've never harassed anyone. I've been trying to protect this neighborhood from people who don't understand how things work here." "And how do things work here? We have standards. We have rules. We don't hang laundry outside or park work trucks in driveways or play music at all hours." Karen's voice was rising, drawing the attention of neighbors who had begun to emerge from their houses. "We don't throw parties every weekend or let our children run wild in the streets." "Mrs. Whitmore, the Martinez children weren't running wild. They were playing in their own backyard pool when they saw your kids in distress and alerted their mother." This information seemed to short-circuit Karen's ability to process reality. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to clear her vision. They weren't supposed to be watching. They were supposed to be inside. Detective Chen made a note. "Who was supposed to be inside? All of them. They're too loud. To ... present." This used to be a quiet neighborhood. Across the street, Miguel Martinez was walking toward them, his work boots squelching slightly on the wet pavement. He moved with the careful dignity of a man who'd been judged and found wanting too many times to count. Detective's voice carried a slight accent, carefully controlled. "I wanted to thank you for coming. This situation, it's been building for months." Karen turned on him like a cornered animal. What's been building is your family's complete disregard for community standards." "Mrs. Whitmore," Detective Chen's voice cut through Karen's tirade like a blade. "Mr. Martinez, can you tell me what you mean by building?" Miguel glanced at Karen, then back at the detective. "My wife saved those children's lives today. She jumped over our fence, pulled them out of the pool, performed CPR until the paramedics arrived. And you know what the first thing Mrs. Whitmore said to her was, 'What?' She asked Rosa why she was on her property without permission." The words hit the small crowd of gathered neighbors like a physical force. Karen could hear Mrs. Patterson from next door gasp audibly. Even old Mr. Henderson, who usually minded his own business, shook his head in disgust. That's not— I was in shock, Karen protested. I wasn't thinking clearly. Mrs. Whitmore, Detective Chen said, I need you to think very carefully about your next words. Are you telling me that when your neighbors saved your children's lives, your first concern was about trespassing? Karen opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. The truth was ugly and undeniable, sitting between them like a third person in the conversation. She calls the HOA about us every week, Miguel continued, his voice steady, but filled with exhaustion, noise complaints, parking violations, reports about our vegetable garden, attracting pests. Last month, she tried to get our dog removed because he barked when the mailman came. We don't have a dog, came a voice from behind Miguel. Rosa Martinez had returned from the hospital, her scrub still damp, her face etched with the kind of bone-deep weariness that came from saving lives and being thanked with suspicion. Mrs. Martinez, Detective Chen said, how are the children? They'll be fine. A little water in their lungs, but no permanent damage. Rosa's voice was professional, clinical. They're very lucky they weren't underwater longer. Karen felt compelled to speak, to reclaim some moral high ground. I want to thank you, of course, for helping them, but I still don't understand how they got into our backyard. Rosa looked at her for a long moment, and Karen saw something in the woman's eyes that made her stomach turn. It wasn't anger or even disappointment. It was pity. Mrs. Whitmore, your children have been coming to our fence every day for weeks. They watch Isabella and Carlos play in our pool, and they've been asking their grandmother if they can join them. That's impossible. My children would never. Your fence has a loose board, Miguel said quietly. Emma and Ethan have been squeezing through it to play in our backyard when you're not watching. My mother-in-law has been giving them snacks and letting them pet our neighbor's cat. The ground seemed to shift beneath Karen's feet. Her perfect children, her obedient twins, had been living secret lives in the backyard of the family she'd been trying to destroy. Today, Rosa continued, they came over, asking if they could swim. I told them they needed to ask their mother first. They said they would, but ... She gestured helplessly. I was getting ready for work. I thought they'd gone home. Instead, they went to your pool, Detective Chen said, addressing Karen. A pool that apparently wasn't secured. Karen felt the weight of judgment from every direction. We have a fence. We have a gate. Was the gate locked, Mrs. Whitmore? Silence stretched between them like a chasm. Karen knew the answer, and everyone else seemed to know it too. I thought. I was right here. I was watching. You were watching us, Miguel said, and there was no accusation in his voice, only sadness. You were so focused on finding fault with my family that you didn't notice your own children were in danger. Detective Chen closed her notebook. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm going to need you to come to the station tomorrow to give a formal statement. There will likely be a child services investigation, given the circumstances. Child services. Karen's voice cracked. But my children are fine. They're safe. Rosa saved them. Mrs. Martinez saved them. The detective corrected, the same. Mrs. Martinez, you've been filing complaints about for months. The same family you've been trying to get removed from the neighborhood. Karen looked around at the faces surrounding her neighbors she'd lived next to for years. People she'd served on committees with, families whose children played with her twins. In every face, she saw the same expression: disgust, disappointment, and something that might have been shame on her behalf. I was trying to protect the neighborhood, she said weakly. From what? Rosa asked, and the question was so genuine, so devoid of malice, that it hit Karen harder than any accusation could have. Karen opened her mouth to answer, but found herself staring into the kind, tired eyes of a woman who'd just saved her children's lives after months of harassment. A woman who worked nights at the hospital, caring for sick children. A woman who'd opened her home to Karen's twins when they'd been lonely and seeking friendship. I don't know, Karen whispered, and for the first time in months, she was telling the absolute truth. Detective Chen pocketed her notebook. Mrs. Whitmore, I strongly suggest you use the time while your children are at the hospital to think about how you want to proceed. Tomorrow's conversation is going to determine a lot about your family's future. As the detective walked away, Karen found herself alone on her porch, surrounded by the debris of her shattered phone, and the fluorescent lights in the police station's interview room cast harsh shadows across Karen's face as she sat across from Detective Chen, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She'd barely slept, spending the night pacing her empty house while Emma and Ethan remained at the hospital for observation. David had stayed with them, his silence more damning than any accusation. "Mrs. Whitmore, before we begin, I want you to know that Mrs. Martinez has declined to press charges for harassment," Detective Chen said, settling into her chair with a file folder. "However, the district attorney is reviewing the case for potential child endangerment charges." Karen's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes. Child endangerment. I would never endanger my children. Yet they nearly drowned in an unsecured pool while you were surveilling your neighbors. The detective opened her file. "Let's start with this anonymous tip I received yesterday. Someone called to report that you'd been systematically harassing the Martinez family for months. I've spent the morning reviewing your complaint history." Detective Chen pulled out a thick stack of papers. 47 reports to various city departments in 6 months. Noise complaints, parking violations, permit challenges, even a report to animal control about a non-existent dog. This goes far. Beyond Neighborhood Watch, Karen stared at the stack of papers, her own obsessive documentation turned against her. "I was being thorough. You were being vindictive." The detective's voice remained steady, professional. "Tell me about the fence." "What? About it?" "The loose board that allowed your children to access the Martinez property. When did you first notice it?" Karen's stomach clenched. She'd noticed the loose board 3 weeks ago, had even mentioned it to David, but acknowledging it would have meant admitting her children were seeking friendship with the very people she'd been trying to ostracize. I don't remember." Detective Chen made a note. "Mrs. Martinez's mother-in-law, Mrs. Santos, has been documenting your children's visits. She kept a journal because she was concerned about the situation. Would you like to hear what she wrote?" Karen didn't answer, but the detective continued anyway. "Emma and Ethan came again today. They seemed so lonely. Emma asked if I could be her grandmother too, because hers lives far away. I gave them cookies and let them help water the vegetables. They are sweet children, but they seem afraid to talk about their mother." Each word felt like a physical blow. Karen's perfect children, her carefully controlled family image, dissolving into a portrait of emotional neglect. Mrs. Santos also noted that your children frequently asked why you didn't like their family. Do you know what she told them? Karen shook her head, not trusting her voice. She told them that sometimes people are afraid of things they don't understand, and that fear can make people do unkind things. She said that didn't make it right, but it made it human. Tears began to roll down Karen's cheeks, cutting tracks through her foundation. "I wasn't afraid. I was trying to protect." "What were you protecting them from, Mrs. Whitmore?" "A pediatric nurse who saved their lives, a landscaper who teaches neighborhood kids about plants, an elderly woman who bakes cookies and grows vegetables." The question hung in the air like a judgment. Karen found herself thinking about the Martinez family's actual crimes, being bilingual, working with their hands, living their lives openly and joyfully in a way that somehow made Karen's own existence feel small and mean. "I worked so hard to make this neighborhood perfect," Karen whispered. 15 years of committee meetings and property maintenance and making sure everyone followed the rules. Then they moved in and just ... existed. They didn't even try to fit in. Fit into what? To the way things are supposed to be. Karen's voice was gaining strength, fed by years of justified grievance, quiet, orderly, respectful of property values and community standards. Detective Chen leaned forward. "Mrs. Whitmore, I've lived in this city for 12 years. I've investigated domestic disputes in million-dollar neighborhoods and trailer parks. You know what I've learned? The most dangerous people aren't the ones who break the rules. They're the ones who think their rules matter more than other people's humanity." The words hit Karen like a slap. She opened her mouth to protest, but Detective Chen wasn't finished. "Your children nearly died yesterday because you were so focused on documenting your neighbors' imaginary crimes that you forgot to secure your own pool. A pool, I might add, that doesn't have the safety features required by current city code. That's impossible. We had it inspected when we moved in 15 years ago. The code has changed. The Martinez family's pool, the one you've been trying to get shut down, is actually compliant with current safety standards. Yours isn't." Karen felt the room spinning around her. Every foundation of her moral superiority was crumbling beneath the weight of reality. "There's something else," Detective Chen continued. "The anonymous tip about your harassment campaign. It didn't come from the Martinez family. Karen looked up sharply. What? It came from someone who was tired of watching you destroy a good family's reputation. Someone who'd been documenting your behavior the same way you'd been documenting theirs. The detective pulled out a tablet and swiped to a video file. This is security footage from the Henderson house across the street. Mr. Henderson installed cameras last month after some break-ins in the area. He's been watching you, Mrs. Whitmore, the same way you've been watching the Martinez family. The video showed Karen's front porch from across the street. There she was, standing with her coffee mug, phone in hand, photographing the Martinez house at 6:47 a.m. Another clip showed her measuring the length of Miguel's truck with a tape measure while he was at work. A third showed her dumping a bag of garbage into the Martinez's trash bin the night before pickup, then calling the city to report them for overfilling their container. Mr. Henderson has hours of footage, Detective Chen said. You photographing their laundry, you timing their visitors with a stopwatch, you following their children to the bus stop. This isn't neighborhood watch, Mrs. Whitmore. This is stalking. Karen stared at the screen, watching herself through a stranger's eyes. The woman in the video looked unhinged, obsessive, dangerous. She couldn't reconcile this person with her own image of herself as a protector of community standards. I was trying to, destroy a family because they didn't meet your approval? No. Karen's voice cracked. I was trying to save my neighborhood. I was trying to protect what I'd built. What you built was a prison, Detective Chen said, and the only people trapped in it were your own children. The door to the interview room opened, and David entered with a social worker Karen didn't recognize. His face was drawn, aged by the events of the past 24 hours. Karen, he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion, we need to talk. The social worker, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, took the seat next to Detective Chen. Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Patricia Williams with Child Protective Services. I've been reviewing your case. Karen's blood turned to ice. My children are fine. They're safe. Rosa saved them. Mrs. Martinez saved them, Patricia corrected. But that doesn't address the underlying issues that led to their endangerment. What issues? David cleared his throat. Karen, the kids told the hospital staff that they've been going to the Martinez house because they were lonely. They said you wouldn't let them play with the other children in the neighborhood. That's not true. They can play with anyone they want as long as they meet your standards, Patricia finished. Mrs. Whitmore, your children have been isolated from their peers for months. They've been denied normal social interaction because of your personal grievances against their neighbors. 3 professionals who'd seen enough dysfunction to recognize it immediately. And her husband, who'd finally stopped enabling her behavior. I was protecting them, she said weakly. From what? Patricia asked. From friendship? From kindness? From learning that the world is bigger than your carefully controlled suburban bubble? From people who don't understand how things work here? Mrs. Whitmore, Patricia said gently, your children understand perfectly how things work. They understand that their mother's approval is more important than their happiness. They understand that rules matter more than relationships. They understand that being different is dangerous. Karen felt something breaking inside her chest. That's not what I wanted. But it's what you created, David said. Karen, I've been watching you destroy yourself for months. I thought if I just stayed quiet, if I just supported you, you'd eventually see how wrong this was. But I was wrong. I enabled you to hurt our children. I never hurt them. You isolated them. You taught them to fear people who were different. You made them ashamed of their own kindness. David's voice was shaking. Yesterday, when Emma woke up in the hospital, you know what she asked me? Karen shook her head. She asked if Rosa was in trouble for saving them. She was worried that you'd be mad at the woman who saved her life. The words hit Karen like a physical blow. She doubled over, gasping for air as the full weight of her actions crashed down on her. I need to fix this, she whispered. I need to make this. Unshree Karen sat in the passenger seat while David drove, watching the familiar streets of Maple Grove pass by with new eyes. Every house looked different, now less like monuments to her achievements and more like homes where actual people lived. Actual lives. The kids can come home tomorrow, David said, breaking the silence that had stretched between them for 20 minutes. But Patricia wants to do a home visit first. Karen nodded, not trusting her voice. The social worker had been kind, but firm about the conditions of Emma and Ethan's return. family therapy, individual counseling for Karen, and a complete end to her harassment campaign against the Martinez family. "There's something else," David continued, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "I called my sister. The kids are going to stay with Jennifer for a few weeks while we figure this out." "What?" Karen's head snapped up. "You can't just send them away. They need to be home. Karen, they need to be somewhere safe while you get help. Yesterday proved that our house isn't safe for them right now." The word stung, but Karen couldn't argue with them. Her children had nearly died while she was obsessing over her neighbor's imaginary crimes. That wasn't the behavior of a protective mother. It was the behavior of someone who'd lost sight of what actually mattered. They pulled into their driveway, and Karen's stomach lurched. The Martinez house sat across the street like an accusation. Miguel's truck was in the driveway, and she could see Rosa's car behind it. They were home, probably trying to process the trauma of the previous day, and Karen had no idea how to face them. "I should apologize," she said suddenly. David turned off the engine and looked at her. "Should you, or do you want to, because Patricia said you have to?" The question forced Karen to examine her own motivations. Did she want to apologize because she was genuinely sorry, or because it was the next item on her rehabilitation checklist? "I don't know," she admitted. "I keep thinking about what Rosa said yesterday. She asked me what I was trying to protect the neighborhood from, and I couldn't." "Answer her. Can you answer her now?" Karen stared at the Martinez house, trying to articulate the fear that had driven her to such extremes. I think I was trying to protect it from change, from anything that reminded me that the world I'd built wasn't as perfect as I thought it was." David nodded slowly. The Martinez family wasn't the threat, Karen. They were just different enough to make you realize that your version of perfection was actually pretty small and lonely. They sat in silence for a moment, then David's phone buzzed with a text. He glanced at it and frowned. "What is it?" "It's from Tom Henderson. He wants to talk to you." Karen's blood ran cold. Tom Henderson was the neighbor who'd been recording her behavior, the one who'd called the police. She'd barely spoken to him in the 15 years they'd lived across from each other, but now he held hours of footage that documented her descent into obsession. Now he's walking over. Karen looked up to see the elderly man crossing the street, his expression unreadable. Tom Henderson was in his 70s, a retired engineer who'd moved to Maple Grove with his wife before she passed away 3 years ago. Karen had always considered him a model neighbor, quiet, neat, respectful of property values. David rolled down the window as Tom approached. "Tom, David, Karen." Tom's voice was gravelly, but not unkind. "I was wondering if we could have a word." Karen wanted to hide, to run into her house and lock the door. Instead, she got out of the car and faced him. "I suppose you want to tell me what a terrible person I am," she said. Tom studied her face. "Actually, I want to tell you about my wife." The response was so unexpected that Karen was momentarily speechless. "Margaret was a lot like you in some ways. She had very specific ideas about how things should be done. She was particular about the neighborhood, about maintaining standards." Tom's eyes grew distant. "When the Johnsons moved in next door, this was about 20 years ago, Margaret was convinced they were going to destroy the property values. What was wrong with them? They were young. They had loud music and parties. They painted their house yellow instead of the approved neutral colors. Margaret spent months documenting their violations, filing complaints, trying to get them to conform to her vision of what the neighborhood should be." Karen felt a chill of recognition. "What happened?" "One winter, Margaret had a stroke. She was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and I was falling apart trying to take care of everything. You know who shoveled our driveway? Who brought me meals? Who sat with me in the hospital waiting room?" Karen already knew the answer, but she waited for him to say it. "The Johnsons, the young couple Margaret had been trying to get rid of. They took care of us like we were family." Tom's voice softened. "When Margaret came home, she was different. The stroke had changed her, made her more aware of what mattered. She spent the last 15 years of her life trying to make up for those first few months of cruelty. Did she succeed? She tried. But you can't undo damage that easily. The Johnsons moved away after a few years. They never said it was because of Margaret's initial treatment, but we both knew." Karen felt tears forming in her eyes. "Why? Are you telling me this? Because I've been watching you make the same mistakes Margaret made, only worse." And because I've been watching the Martinez family handle your attacks with more grace than you deserve." The words hit Karen like physical blows, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. "I saw Rosa jump that fence yesterday," Tom continued. "I saw her pull your children out of that pool and breathe life back into them. And I saw you ask her why she was on your property without permission. I was in shock. You were being yourself," Tom interrupted. "The same self that's been tormenting that family for months? The same self that was so focused on finding fault with them that you forgot to watch your own children." Karen looked across the street at the Martinez house. Through the front window, she could see Isabella and Carlos playing in the living room, their grandmother reading them a story. It was a picture of domestic happiness that seemed to mock her own family's dysfunction. "I don't know how to fix this," she whispered. "Start by telling the truth," Tom said. "Stop pretending this was about neighborhood standards or property values. Admit what it was really about." "What was it about?" Tom's expression softened slightly. "You tell me, Karen, what were you really afraid of?" Karen closed her eyes, trying to find the courage to excavate the ugly truth from the depths of her soul. When she opened them, she saw Rosa Martinez walking toward them, still in her scrubs from another shift at the hospital. "Mrs. Whitmore," Rosa said, her voice carefully neutral. "I heard Emma and Ethan are doing well." "Yes, thanks to you." Karen's voice was barely audible. "Rosa, I know you want to apologize," Rosa interrupted, "but I'm not ready to hear it yet." The words stung, but Karen recognized they were deserved. "I need you to understand something," Rosa continued. "My family moved here because we wanted our children to grow up in a safe, welcoming community. We researched the schools, the crime rates, the neighborhood demographics. We thought we'd found the perfect place." "You did," Karen said weakly. "This is a good neighborhood, is it?" Rosa's voice was sharp now, because from where I'm standing, it looks like a place where a nurse who saves children's lives gets treated like a criminal, where a landscaper who takes pride in his work gets harassed for parking his truck in his own driveway, where children are taught to fear people who speak different languages or have different customs." Karen felt the weight of every neighbor's eyes on her. Word of the previous day's events had spread through Maple Grove like wildfire, and people were beginning to emerge from their houses to witness this confrontation. "I was wrong," Karen said, her voice growing stronger. "I was wrong about everything." "Were you?" Rosa stepped closer. "Or were you just being honest about what you really thought of us?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Karen looked at Rosa Martinez, this woman who'd dedicated her life to healing children, who'd risked her own safety to save Karen's twins, who'd endured months of harassment with dignity and grace, and finally understood what her real crime had been. "I was afraid," Karen said, the words tearing from her throat like a confession. "I was afraid that if I let you be part of this neighborhood, if I let you belong here, then maybe I didn't belong here either." Rosa's expression didn't change, but Karen saw something flicker in her eyes, not forgiveness, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. "I built my whole identity around being the perfect neighbor," Karen continued. "The one who maintained standards, who preserved property values, who kept everything exactly the way it was supposed to be. But you didn't need my approval to belong here. You didn't need my permission to be part of the community. You just ... were. And that threatened you. It terrified me. Because if you could be happy and successful and beloved without following my rules, then maybe my rules were meaningless. Maybe I was meaningless." The words hung in the air like a verdict. Karen had finally excavated the truth from the depths of her soul, and it was uglier than she'd imagined. "So you tried to destroy us," Rosa said. "It wasn't a question." "I tried. To prove that you didn't belong, that you were wrong for this neighborhood, that you were the problem." Karen's voice was shaking. "But I was the—" 3 months later, Karen stood in her backyard, adjusting the new safety gate on her pool for the 3rd time. The automatic lock mechanism still felt foreign in her hands, but the insurance inspector had been clear this was non-negotiable. If she wanted Emma and Ethan to come home, the children had returned from Jennifer's house 2 weeks ago, but the distance between them felt like an ocean. They were polite, careful, treating her like a stranger who might explode without warning. Karen supposed she deserved that. "Mom," Emma's voice came from the sliding door. "Mrs. Santos is here." Karen turned to see Isabella's grandmother standing at the back gate, holding a covered dish and wearing the patient expression of someone who'd been watching Karen's fumbling attempts at home improvement for the past hour. "Mrs. Santos?" Karen said, hurrying over to unlock the new gate. "Thank you for coming." The elderly woman stepped into the yard, her eyes taking in the new safety features, the pool cover, the alarm system, the fence reinforcements that Miguel had quietly installed the week before. "It looks good," Mrs. Santos said in her careful English. "Very safe." Karen had been meeting with Mrs. Santos twice a week for the past 2 months, part of what her therapist called restorative justice work. The elderly woman had agreed to help Karen understand the impact of her actions, though she'd made it clear that forgiveness would be earned, not given. "I brought tamales," Mrs. Santos said, holding up the dish. "For the children. That's very kind of you." "Emma and Ethan are in the living room, actually," Mrs. Santos interrupted gently. "I came to talk to you first." They sat at Karen's patio table, the same table where she'd once planned her campaign of harassment against Mrs. Santos's family. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. "Rosa told me about your meeting yesterday," Mrs. Santos said. Karen's stomach clenched. Yesterday had been her first official conversation with Rosa since the confrontation in the driveway 3 months ago. It hadn't gone well. "She's still angry," Karen said. "She's still hurt," Mrs. Santos corrected. "There's a difference. I don't know how to fix that." Mrs. Santos studied Karen's face. Over the past 2 months, she'd watched Karen attend every therapy session, complete every assignment from the court-mandated parenting classes, and slowly, painfully, begin to acknowledge the depth of her prejudice and the harm it had caused. "Tell me what you learned in therapy this week," Mrs. Santos said. Karen had been dreading this question, but she'd learned that Mrs. Santos had a way of extracting truth that made evasion impossible. "Dr. Rodriguez wants me to understand that my behavior wasn't really about your family," Karen said slowly. "It was about my own insecurity. My fear that I wasn't as important or valuable as I thought I was, and that I used your family as a way to prove my worth to myself. By making you the problem, I could be the solution. By making you wrong, I could be right." Mrs. Santos nodded. "That's good understanding, but understanding isn't enough." "I know. Rosa made that clear yesterday." "What did she say?" Karen closed her eyes, remembering the conversation that had left her feeling more hopeless than ever. "She said that I keep talking about my growth and my journey and my healing, but I haven't actually done anything to repair the damage I caused. She said, I'm still making it about me. Is she right?" The question hit Karen like a slap. She wanted to protest, to defend her months of therapy and court-ordered classes and community service. But Mrs. Santos was watching her with the same steady gaze that had made her grandmother for half the neighborhood kind. But unflinching, "Yes," Karen whispered. "She's right. So what are you going to do about it?" Karen had been asking herself the same question for weeks. How do you repair damage that goes beyond apologies? How do you prove that your change is real when every gesture feels inadequate? "I don't know," Karen admitted. "Rosa won't talk to me. Miguel nods politely when he sees me, but won't engage. The kids still ask why you don't like us, and I don't know how to explain that the problem was never you, it was me." Mrs. Santos was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This came in the mail yesterday," she said, handing it to Karen. Karen unfolded the paper and felt her blood turn to ice. It was another HOA complaint filed against the Martinez family for excessive noise during evening hours. The signature at the bottom belonged to Mrs. Patterson, the neighbor who lived next to Karen. "She's still filing complaints against you." "Every week," Mrs. Santos said calmly. "Since you stopped, she started. Same accusations, same language. Even some of the same photographs." Karen stared at the complaint, recognizing her own rhetoric recycled by another neighbor. The realization that her months of harassment had given others permission to continue the persecution made her sick. "I have to stop this," Karen said. "Do you why?" The question seemed obvious, but Mrs. Santos was watching her with the intensity of someone administering a test. "Because it's wrong. Because you don't deserve this." Because Karen stopped, understanding what Mrs. Santos was looking for. Because this is what actual accountability looks like. Not just stopping my own bad behavior, but taking responsibility for the environment I created. Mrs. Santos smiled First genuine smile Karen had seen from her in months. "Rosa doesn't think you understand that yet," she said. "She thinks you're still focused on your own redemption rather than their restoration." "How do I prove I understand?" "You don't prove it too, Rosa. You prove it to yourself." That evening, Karen found herself standing on Mrs. Patterson's front porch, the HOA complaint clutched in her hand. Through the window, she could see her neighbor watching television, probably unaware that her harassment campaign was about to end. Karen knocked, and Mrs. Patterson answered with a conspiratorial smile. "Karen, I was just about to call you. Did you see the Martinez's had another gathering last weekend? I got some excellent photos of the cars parked on the street, Linda. Stop." Karen's voice was firm but not unkind. "I need to talk to you about these complaints you've been filing." Mrs. Patterson's smile faltered. "I thought you'd be pleased. Someone has to maintain standards now that since you've been dealing with your situation." "My situation was harassment," Karen said clearly, "and these complaints are harassment too. I'm just following your example. My example was wrong." Karen held up the paper. "This complaint is based on lies, Linda. I know because I used to tell the same lies." Mrs. Patterson's face flushed red. "Those people don't belong here, Karen. You know that. Just because you've been forced to pretend otherwise doesn't mean the rest of us have to stop." Karen's voice cut through the woman's tirade like a blade. "The Martinez family belongs here more than either of us do. They contribute to this community. They care about their neighbors. They saved my children's lives. You can't seriously expect me to. I expect you to stop filing false complaints. I expect you to leave that family alone. And if you don't, I'll make sure the HOA board knows exactly how baseless these accusations are." Mrs. Patterson stared at her in shock. "You're defending them?" "I'm defending what's right," Karen said. "Something I should have done months ago." She turned and walked away, leaving Mrs. Patterson standing in her doorway, clutching the door, framed like it was the only thing holding her up. The next morning, Karen found Rosa in her front yard, watering the flowers that had somehow survived months of harassment. Rosa looked up as Karen approached, her expression wary but not hostile. "I stopped, Mrs. Patterson," Karen said without preamble. "She won't be filing any more complaints." Rosa straightened slowly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Mrs. Santos helped me understand that I wasn't just responsible for my own actions. I was responsible for creating an environment where other people felt justified in targeting your family. And I contacted the HOA board this morning. I withdrew every complaint I'd ever filed against you, and I submitted a formal letter taking responsibility for encouraging others to harass you." Rosa set down her watering can. "What does that mean for you?" "It means I'll probably be removed from the board. It means people will know exactly what I did and why." Karen took a shaky breath. "It means I'll finally face real consequences instead of just talking about accountability." For the first time in months, Rosa looked at Karen without anger in her eyes. "That's not why you did it, though," Rosa said. "No, I did it because it was right. Because your family deserves to live here in peace. Because Isabella and Carlos shouldn't have to grow up thinking that neighbors are threats to be defended against." Rosa nodded slowly. "Mrs. Santos said, you've been working with her. She's been teaching me about the difference between guilt and responsibility. Guilt is about feeling bad for what I did. Responsibility is about changing what I do going forward." "And which one is this?" Karen gestured toward the Martinez house, where she could see Isabella and Carlos playing in the backyard while their grandmother hung laundry on the line. The same laundry line Karen had once complained about. "This is me asking if my children can finally play with yours," Karen said. "Not because I want forgiveness or because I want to feel better about myself, but because Emma and Ethan have been asking about Isabella every day since they came home, and because children shouldn't have to pay for their parent."